I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome to Arcane Mark, Design Diary, Bonuses, and Penalties.
So to start off, generally when we talk about bonuses and penalties, the version that folks who've been playing Pathfinder are going to be most familiar with, or many other similar games, is the idea of, rolling a 20-sided die and adding or subtracting some number from it.
That's right. A d20 plus a modifier. The so-called d20 system, because it uses a 20-sided die. Since we're going to use Pathfinder 2nd Edition as a case study for the use of bonuses and penalties in tabletop RPGs, not because it's like in any way the only exemplar of using a d20, but mostly because we weren't going to dig deeply into Pathfinder 2e, because we know we have a lot of Pathfinder 2e fans who watch this channel. And at the same time, we're going to talk about insights into the usage and limitations and other factors and philosophy of bonuses and penalties that apply to many different game systems as well.
So one of the things with bonuses and penalties is what are some of their core functions from a design perspective?
That's right.
So bonuses and penalties can showcase a difference in skill between different creatures and in your setting. And they can all, if they're something that's static and consistent, and then they can also represent situations or states. So you have things like the circumstance bonuses and penalties in Pathfinder that represent sort of this is something about the situation, or they might represent some sort of a thing that is tied to like a condition that has been applied to someone.
That's right. So in general, they tend to represent either an intrinsic quality that alters the probability in one way or the other, or some kind of additional factor, whether it's beneficial or detrimental, an advantage or a disadvantage, you might say.
Yeah, and those advantages or disadvantages that aren't intrinsic can vary in how they come about and how often they come about. You might have something that's like, oh, this is a rarely applied bonus or penalty that has come about because of a spell.
Right? Or you might be, this is my sword Stormbringer. I do it on every attack, whatever this bonus is.
It could be something that comes from your character. It could be something that comes from like something that a monster's done, or it can be something that comes from the overall environment that you're in.
That's right. And depending on your game system, you might have different changes that are made based on that. In fact, you could even have metagame bonuses and penalties that are determined by narrative arcs that are not even involving your character or the environment, or that are based on how lucky you were in previous times, that like if things go against you, you become luckier in the future, or other unusual ways that that things change around, or like a complication that you chose earlier that alters your chances of succeeding now, but in exchange for possibly giving you some beneficial benefit for it coming into the situation. So there's all sorts of permutations in games for bonuses and penalties. Now, when we talk about bonuses and penalties, very specifically, the normal ones you'll see in a D20 system and in Pathfinder 2nd Edition most often are very specifically a bonus that is a positive modifier, a plus something, that is added to your d20 roll, or a bonus for damage that is added to your damage roll. Those are added to a roll you're making. Penalty being a negative that is subtracted from that roll that you're making. Possibly they'd be added together to each other and create an overall modifier with some positives, some negatives.
And usually that's a static number.
Yes. Sometimes you can have other types of bonuses or penalties. You could add an extra d6 to your result. Pathfinder 2e, you probably wouldn't do that because that could potentially get very high, and Pathfinder 2e is more scrupulous with its bonuses than some other d20 systems. We'll get into that later. You can also have effective bonuses and penalties that are based on some other kind of die manipulation. Either like rolling a certain number of dice and taking a specific one, such as like roll twice and take the higher 5th edition D&D advantage, roll twice and take the lower 5th edition D&D disadvantage, or just a situation where you have a dice pool and it's just like, well, roll as many of these dice of various sizes as you can and take the two highest and add them together.
Yeah.
For example.
One of the situations that I tend to think about this often too as someone who makes adventures is that when you have a whole party attempting something, you know, it's at worst, roll 4 times, take the highest, and then add that to the bonus of the,
Of the weakest
of the
person.
weakest person. Like, yeah, you may work out a little bit differently than that,
It's
but
usually much better than
it's
that.
usually much
But
better than that because yeah, hypothetically, you could have like your lowest person. Yeah. Anyway, but
yeah, no. So let's give a very stereotypical example of this. We're not going to get right now deep into the weeds on how bonuses and penalties
mhm,
are accrued. We're going to give an example of why the deciding to make something everyone can try, and if one
mhm,
person succeeds, it's done, and there's no penalty for failure, is
yeah,
effectively giving a bonus. So, you are designing an adventure, you're a GM, or maybe you're even working at a company and you're going to publish this to everybody. And the decision is that you've decided the only thing that makes sense for the story is
mhm,
everyone rolls to search for this treasure or this
mhm,
secret door, and if anyone finds it, then everybody finds it, and that's how it's got to be.
yeah.
Okay, so what do you think before we're about to crack the math that the chance of your six-person party will be to find this door? Let's assume that it is so well hidden, and its
Mhm,
perception, which in Pathfinder 2e is a scaling number, so it's always going to be at least a certain amount good.
yeah.
So your worst person, you hit it and you made it like a DC 30, which the worst person you've calculated in the party probably needs to roll like a natural 18 to find it,
Mhm,
because this is just like a low level
yeah.
adventure, or not like first level, but like, it's somewhere around like level, maybe not that low. Some people call it mid level, like level 8 or 9 or so, and you're like, okay, we think they're gonna have, the worst person is probably gonna have plus 12
Yeah.
at level 9, because they would have had numerous chances to raise their wisdom and etc. etc. Maybe they even have 11 and they need a 19, but we'll say that the average worst person needs an 18.
Perception is a great one to pick for this example too because it avoids several additional complications that you would need to think about, such as people who aren't trained, and so
Yes,
therefore their bonuses are so much lower
that it goes
that
really
it
out of
goes really out
control.
of control,
So I pick perception for that
or
reason.
something that would require you to be trained in it to even roll, and then you take the number.
So, and Ashmintalu says maybe their players would spend an hour searching over and over and over again. Let's say that you, at least in your adventure, is just
Hmm.
like, everyone looks once. If they didn't find it, they miss it. They're not
Yeah.
allowed to roll again. Okay? What do you think? Put your answer in chat. What do you think the chance is, even if you assumed that everybody was as bad as that really bad person who
Hmm.
needed an 18 to make it, even though they had basically like 12 wisdom and were trained in
Yeah.
perception at level 9? Nobody was an expert. Nobody had any perception items. Nobody had higher than 12 wisdom. What do you think the chances are that they actually find it? And I'm guessing that people know that, well, Mark asked that question, so it's probably pretty high. So David Nielsen says probably 73% chance that they actually find it. So I am going to calculate the exact percent chance that they actually find it, and we'll see what other people think that the chance is that they actually find it. Where they only find it on a roll of 18.
There you go.
That is the correct amount. I accidentally did a weird
Hmm.
calculation. So, what are the numbers? Teledolocadora. The number is oh yeah, you're supposed to guess based on your gut instinct, not calculate it. But this is a 6-player party. We're assuming like Pathfinder 1's assumed table size for
Oh, 6 player party. Okay.
yes, this is a
Yeah.
6-player party. It's got six characters are in there.
And what are the chances that at
What
least
are
one
the
of them rolls
chances
at
that
least an
they
18?
find the thing
Yeah.
that could only be found on an 18 by this minimum viable
Hmm.
amount? If you said they all had only the lowest amount,
Yeah.
because 30 is, by the way, like a ridiculously high number to force on something that's like
The
pretty
bonus is good.
important to
Yeah.
the plot. If you look at like DCs by level, for example, you will see that I think it's like the high or very high.
Yeah. So if you're
Oh no,
level,
yeah,
yeah.
it's actually one below the very high for its
Yes.
level. You would never normally do that. Put that kind of thing onto a check, right? Uh, And yes, Telelogador, you're correct. It's one minus the chance of everyone failing.
Hmm.
Um, but so our guess here is a 73% chance that they will find it. Their chance is actually a little worse than that.
Hmm.
It's around 63, but which means that even this thing that is so hard to find that people only find it on an 18, if the
Yeah.
whole party only needed 18, and Ashimentalu was very close with 60%, and yeah, it's 63. So the party is nearly 2/3 to find it, and that was assuming everybody had nearly, like, not the worst possible perception because they could be two
Hmm.
lower than that, nearly the worst. Once you have a heterogeneous group where some people have slightly better perception than that, that drastically shoots it into the
And I think
stratosphere.
this is something that's really easy for folks to miss. It's one of the most common things that I found myself adding in development is clarity on whether the check is something that everyone's rolling or whether the check is something that, one person attempts. And considering this type of thing, you're going to increase the DC because everyone's rolling, or is this something where only one person can attempt, or also, like, how important is it that someone succeeds? Are you kind of assuming that someone succeeds and you just want to have them roll and the chance of them failing is supposed to be fairly low? um, or is this something where getting more successes is going to benefit you more, and only one person succeeding gets you some kind of a baseline level? Or maybe it's something where you're counting up and seeing how many overall successes the PCs get.
Yep. And considering Warlock says, is the solution getting the DCs by level chart temporary tattooed for con season? No, so that's the issue.
Hmm.
Because this is a danger that Linda is talking about, her very experience as like the super over Leshy of all adventures, is that the danger is you use the DC by level
Hmm.
chart, and there, but because you only looked at that and only looked at the bonuses of the
Hmm.
DCs, and you did not look at the hidden bonus that was letting everybody roll, and you only did one
Yeah.
success to get it, that you're going to do it wrong. Essentially, you're not going to pick the correct value for the probability that you want, because it's actually the biggest bonus that we gave everybody there was the
Hmm.
hidden bonus that they could all roll and just take the highest. They were essentially getting the fortune effect that was like roll 6 times and take the highest result,
Hmm.
but the lowest person's modifier has to roll. Except they actually are getting much better than that, but they're getting
Yes.
something that's better than use the lowest modifier then roll 6 times, or
Hmm.
like
So they're getting something that's better than follow the expert.
Yeah, imagine Follow the Expert said this. Everybody rolls a d20. Take the highest number and add that to the lowest person's result. Like, they make it like pretty much every time. Or not follow. What did we call it?
Is it?
It's Quiet Allies.
Oh, Quiet Allies. Yeah,
Imagine
sorry.
what Quiet Allies
I said
says
the
whenever
wrong
you
one.
were
That's,
stealthing,
you know what I meant.
everybody
Yeah.
rolls. And so, like, roll 6 times and take the highest result. The weird thing is that the chance that one of those is going to be 18 or above is actually very high. And the only reason it was 63% is I made it so
Hmm.
extreme that it was at the you needed 18, which is why you have to do the unintuitive thing and put in a DC that's so hard most people can barely make it at all. If you actually was supposed to be 50-50 for
Hmm.
some reason, it would have needed to be that they needed a 19 for that person with the lower result.
Yeah.
Because if you think that like, let's just slightly loosen it up. Let's say it was DC 28 in that
Hmm.
assumption. Again, also our 63% underestimated the probability
Hmm.
because it assumed everybody was as bad as the worst person. If just simply making it so
Hmm.
that you needed a 16 to succeed, even if everybody was the worst person, you now have an 83% chance
Hmm.
of succeeding.
And for fun, while you're at that same one, how does that change if you have a 4-player party?
So at that point, if you have a 4-player party and everybody needs to get a 16 or above, that's still a 70%
Hmm.
chance of succeeding.
But you'll notice a lot of times in
I'll
organized
just
play,
roll a flat check. If anybody gets a 16,
when
they make
when
it.
there are challenges that are like, oh yeah, there's hazards that you're needing to disable, or there's like influence checks, or there's other things like that. A lot of times one of the scalar factors is going to be slightly increasing the DC in addition to slightly increasing the number of things that are going on, and that's part of why.
Yeah. So
It's slightly increasing the DC can help keep that probability in a similar place
Tela de Logadora
without
is saying they
splitting
understand where
that.
quiet allies come from. So the key to
Hmm.
quiet allies is that if you don't have that feat, that everybody's rolling, and even one failure makes the whole team fail. It's the exact opposite.
Yes.
and so you get
And so then
huge.
you're very likely to fail
You'll
because
almost always fail
yeah.
because everybody's rolling, and even one failure will fail. So quite honestly, being like, well, only the worst person has
Mhm.
to try, and you'll never mess up from anybody else, means that your chance of failing in most parties goes down by a drastic amount. But it's the exact opposite of the thing where everybody's rolling and it only takes one person to succeed, but it is completely parallel. As
Mhm.
Ms. Roy points out, humans are usually pretty bad at understanding probability by design because it's an evolutionary advantage to be bad at probability in ways that cause us to do things that are kind of better
Mhm.
in terms of continuing the species rather than be like, oh cool, I see this risk that is going to possibly
Mhm.
be devastatingly bad, but on average pays out a huge amount. I will
Mhm.
definitely do that every
Yes.
time. So like our instincts on probability are not the best.
One of the ways that that definitely shows up is is in like the difference between like people thinking that a plus one bonus in Pathfinder Second Edition, they're like, wait, well, it's just plus one, it's not that big. But particularly in Pathfinder Second Edition, it really makes a huge
So
difference.
let's move into bonuses and let's move into pluses. And just before we do that, I will say that again we said that a reroll is worth a certain amount of a plus in certain ways on average. They have very, very different behavior sets and
Hmm.
distributions of probability. But in general, you can find that a reroll is often worth somewhere around a 4 to 5,
This
and
is
that's
talking
actually
about
in
with a D. This
that's
is yeah.
actually on a D20, a
Hmm.
plus 4 to plus 5 on a D20, and that's true. Weirdly enough, in second edition, with the all the reasons we're going to say that the
Hmm.
pluses are worth more, and in fifth edition, almost equally, but not distributed the same ways around the die. And the reason for that is somewhat serendipity, but also just like the value of pluses went up, but the value of the reroll also went up in a way that was parallel, but made the distributions wildly different. So, whenever someone tells you that this reroll is quote equivalent to a plus
Hmm.
bonus, you should
Not
be
exactly, but
you should be a little bit dubious of that they're equal, but you can believe that they at least have the same expected value. But
mhm.
there's a big difference between uh like as I mentioned in a previous episode, there's a difference between a 100% chance of doing 1 damage and a 1% chance of doing
Or 99
100 damage,
percent, yeah,
or
yeah.
a
Oh yeah,
100%
yeah.
chance of doing 1 damage and a 1% chance of doing 100
Oh yeah, I was
damage.
thinking about your example of the one that's like the steady one versus like the tiny chance of doing a
Yeah,
huge amount.
that
Yeah, yeah.
is right. one
Right, that's it.
percent 100 versus 100% 1.
Mhm.
So that being said, let's talk about bonuses, penalties, their sizes,
Mhm.
and when to use them. So to do that, we're going to quickly give a brief overview of bonuses and penalties in Pathfinder Second Edition. I'm going to compare them to some other D20 based games just together because there are a lot of things that many other D20 based games all do, but the Pathfinder Second Edition does something else.
Before you move on to that, I want to quickly acknowledge a comment here. The pretty famous psychological effect where people are asked to create a random string of like 20 coin flips, and almost no one creates a chain of longer than four heads or tails. So those happen a lot, actually. Yeah, totally. That's why people have the dice jail where they put the dice that are rolling terribly, and because they're cursed, or the GM might look askance because someone's rolling high a bunch of times in a row. But those are just natural parts of the game.
That's right. So probability is hard. That's
Hmm.
just a bottom line true. So when we're looking at a D20 system and its pluses and minuses, we said before you can add some bonuses, you subtract some penalties, maybe add them and subtract to each other to create an overall modifier, and you add that to the result of a D20, comparing it to either a target number or maybe somebody else's roll with their modifier added to it. Depends on which system you're playing. Pathfinder Second Edition, you basically do not do the second one except for initiative,
Hmm.
which is everybody rolls and then compares and orders you up to determine. And you might do a contest like initiative
Hmm.
to win a contest, but in general, a check is a roll with the d20 plus a modifier against the difficulty class because you're checking, did I defeat this
Hmm.
difficulty class?
Yeah, and
So
the check is a lot more stable because whenever you're rolling and you're doing things opposed, you can have situations where one person is vastly favored to win, but then they roll a one and the other person
yes,
rolls a
the
20.
example that Linda what we'll never forget is when her exceptional liar
Hmm.
in 3.5 D&D tried to lie to her little sister,
Hmm.
who rolled a natural 20 on sense motive,
Against her
while
natural
Linda
one.
rolled a natural 1, and Linda failed by 1
Yes,
to lie to her little sister.
that's true.
Um,
So,
and it could never have happened without the ability to vary things up by that massive of an amount when one person rolled a 1 and one person rolled a 20. So that's absolutely the case. Um, so taking into account, we have bonuses and we have penalties. In Pathfinder Second Edition, there are several types of bonuses, penalties, and modifiers, which can be
mhm.
either positive or negative.
And the number of types is extremely important because as well as the fact that you don't have bonus stacking where you have bonuses of the same type that clump together.
Yes. So in Pathfinder Second Edition, there are proficiency modifier to determine how good you are at something based on your training. That in Pathfinder Second Edition adds your level to either um, 2, 4, 6, or 8, or you add nothing if you're not trained in it at all.
Hmm.
So that's your proficiency modifier. You have your ability modifier. That is either plus, minus, or 0, depending on your ability score. Or in the remaster, just your ability modifier is your ability modifier. How strong are you? How dexterous are you? That's generally added to your proficiency modifier to calculate your overall modifier. In theory, that's like where you start out. Now, there's also item bonuses and penalties. An item bonus is how good is your item for helping you on this check. Item penalty is like how weird and cursed is your item. This is very rare to have this.
Very cursed, yes.
This is very rare to have an item penalty, but if you do, it's weird and cursed or broken to a degree that it's causing you serious issues. And that is item bonus or penalty. So then you have, on top of that, a status bonus or penalty, like Linda said before. That's some kind of a condition on yourself. Like, how are you doing today? Are you really afraid? Are you
Hmm.
sick? You're not going to perform as well. That's a penalty.
Hmm.
Are you feeling like a hero? Are you
Yeah.
buffed up?
And a lot of that kind of stuff comes from spells.
And yeah, absolutely. But a lot of it doesn't come from spells. It
Hmm.
could come from conditions or weird special effects on
Yeah.
you. It's something that has changed me
Hmm.
so that I am now not operating under my normal specifications. I'm under a status or
Yeah.
condition.
But
It used to be called a conditional penalty in the playtest, except the next one we're about to say also starts with C and sounded similar, so we changed it to status. Because conditions are one of the key things that can cause it.
hmm.
Um, so the next one is a circumstance bonus or penalty. That is like, what's the situation? Is it like a weird situation that benefits me? Like, I have studied insects for my entire life and I know everything about the way insects move and now I'm fighting insects.
Hmm.
Or am I in a position on the battlefield that's good for me?
And generally, all those other types in Pathfinder Second Edition are going to be fixed based on like specific activities or specific conditions or exactly what item you have or things like that. Whereas circumstance is more often going to be the one where the GM will apply bonuses or penalties just at sort of at their discretion based on what's going on.
Yes, it's possible for the GM to apply a status,
Hmm.
but unlikely.
Yeah.
Circumstances will not only be applied by the GM potentially in Pathfinder 2 and other games that have similar types of bonuses. This
Hmm.
is often one of the two places the GM really gets to put their finger on the scale is either changing the difficulty class entirely or giving a circumstance bonus or penalty. But circumstance bonuses or penalties are the most likely to be not an absolute quality, but
Hmm.
also they could be, but they could also be relative, where it's like there's some effects that say like I mark am now flat-footed and I just
Yeah.
am, and or off balance in the remaster, and I take a penalty on my armor class, and there are some effects that will say, well, no, Mark, you're not flat-footed, period, but you are
Hmm.
flat-footed to Linda and
Yeah.
this closet because Linda and the mimic that is disguised in this closet are
Flanking.
flanking you.
Yes.
And so, but like if some other person does something, you're not completely flat-footed. You don't have a -2 circumstance penalty to AC
Hmm.
overall, but you do against them.
And another way your place will see that is aid as well.
Yes, which is aid is like I will give you a bonus on this check because I'm helping you.
Which is important to remember in adventure design too, because if somebody's already aiding, you're not going to be able to add as the GM, like, oh yeah, here is a circumstance bonus because they already have a
Their
circumstance
circumstance
bonus.
was they were helping.
So in a lot of cases, you'll see stuff in adventures where it's like, okay, and if there's a situation where aiding is likely, then other circumstances, other factors of the situation are more likely to cause DC lowerings.
Exactly. And so, one more thing.
Just one more.
Just one more thing. There's also penalties, but not bonuses. Not bonuses. Never. They're literally not allowed. If you look at the definition of bonuses in PF2, they don't exist. But penalties that have no type to them. They are always cumulative with each other, and they are always penalties that you chose to do a thing completely of your own volition, and nobody else forced them on you or put you into a situation where it happened. You were just like, no, this is me, and I've chosen to make more attacks in the same turn, or I've chosen to
multiple attack penalties.
Yeah, I've chosen to wear an armor, and I don't have enough strength for the armor to avoid its armor penalty on it. And so when you make that choice, you take a penalty that combines with all other penalties. There is no way ever to get a bonus like that. And multiple attack penalty absolutely is the most famous, but sometimes you'll just need that as a voluntary penalty, essentially. Not that you wouldn't like it if the rules changed so it didn't exist, but there you go.
Question: there's no range penalty bonus?
There's not a range penalty bonus. There's only
a range penalty.
So these are all the bonus and penalty types that exist in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, with the rule being, as Linda alluded to before, one of each bonus and penalty of each named type can apply. Only the highest absolute value.
So the worst penalty or the best bonus?
The worst penalty or the best bonus. And as many of the untyped penalties as possible can apply. Now, in other D20 systems, that's not always the case. For instance, in 3.5, 3.0, Pathfinder 1, there were dozens of types. And
some of the stats would add up. And
some of the types were cumulative, even if there was a dodge bonus, that it is cumulative. And it's circumstance that it was cumulative at 3.5. And there were untyped for both bonuses and penalties.
And there was natural armor and enhancement bonus to natural armor, and they weren't the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's correct. Because it was a bonus to the bonus to natural armor.
Yes.
It wasn't the actual same bonus. It was very, very confusing. So you could wind up literally having the entire map of the game pushed because someone made a Jello hat that gave a +1 gelatin bonus to AC. And it was like, well, there was no other way to get a gelatin bonus to AC.
So then you wear your gelatin bonus hat.
Everyone wears their gelatin bonus hat, and now all AC has moved up by 1 by the point in time when the money it costs to buy the Jello hat is so low that everybody can afford it.
And having that kind of bonus spread also meant that there was a drastic difference in the power level of opposition needed to challenge a party of optimizers versus a party who's building typical characters out of the core rulebook.
Oh yes. And in 5th edition D&D, they mostly don't use very many bonuses of the plus and minus type. A lot of things are done with advantage and disadvantage. The thing is, though, that they didn't abolish it entirely. And all of them are essentially the untyped stackable kind that remains. And there's a proficiency modifier as well, and the ability modifier. But then, and items have a bonus. But on top of that, instead of having status and circumstance, it's just well, we don't have that many other ways to get bonuses, but if you do, they all add up together. And so, just slowly, as the edition releases more of them, you just grab one, and then the next, and keep grabbing them until you have them all, and they make massive amounts of change. Now, what do I mean by massive? I'm going to go into that. Bonuses and penalties in tabletop RPGs have a very important and very dangerous role. So first of all, their role being to model what is more likely and what is less likely. But they also sometimes have a role of being used as a reward for making a decision in character building or in the game.
So did you set up a good strategy where you have the high ground and you're doing this sort of thing? Did you have your character stay up all night and so they're tired going into this? Did you fail some checks on your way in and so you're more likely to get noticed because there's a greater group of people looking out for you? Or did you, like you were saying, like did you have a particular character build that's going to cause
Yeah,
your bonus to be higher? I mean, making that choice to say, okay, my character is going to have higher wisdom or higher intelligence. Higher wisdom means that your perception bonus is going to be higher, and that's going to make a difference throughout. Whereas higher intelligence, you're going to have bonuses to more different types of skills.
exactly. It's a reward or consequence for a decision you made in character building,
Mhm.
a decision you made during the game, maybe a reward, a nested reward where you received a
Mhm.
reward that was like an item or something that then gave you the reward of the bonus.
It's also a way to it's also a way to shake up standard expectations by making certain strategies easier or harder to pull off than they might normally be.
But here's the secret hidden catch. The problem with bonuses and penalties is they're not only very foundational, you have to have them, and you need to know what the progression is going to be to make the game's math work. But as a reward to be given out, they're among the most powerful benefits that you can possibly give while also simultaneously feeling to most players, because we discussed earlier about probability and people being inherently not the
Mhm.
greatest at understanding probability in your gut, they always feel like they're way less than what they actually are to 90% or more of players compared to just about any other benefit that you can give them. They feel like, oh, that's it. And one of the secrets that's very interesting about Pathfinder Second Edition is that people started realizing for sure when playing Pathfinder Second Edition that every plus one bonus matters.
Mhm.
A lot of people make a lot of the very accurate point that more plus ones matter more in Pathfinder Second Edition because of the 4 degrees of success system that I pitched for Pathfinder Second Edition and we put in there, which I'm about to explain, and people are totally right that it does make more of a difference because of that, but it doesn't make as much more as you think, and I'll get into why that after I explain what it is. 4 degrees of success in Pathfinder Second Edition basically mean that almost every check can't just succeed or fail. It also critically succeeds by you succeed by 10 or more, or succeed and roll a natural 20. Um, and you critically fail when you fail by 10 or more, or you fail but also roll a natural 1. So essentially, that the reason why people say a plus one matters more, they sometimes say twice as much, is because if you needed an 18 to or an 8 to succeed
See, but
and you
an
needed an
18
18
to
to
critical
critically
succeed.
succeed,
So the bonus both adds a chance that you could succeed when you otherwise would have failed, and a chance you could critically
bingo.
succeed when you otherwise would have
Now
succeeded.
both you've not only added a 7 like you would in a binary system to matter on the d20, you've made
Mhm.
17s better because they are now critical. And on the flip side, if you're rolling something that critical failures can happen, and you need a 12 to succeed, then a 2 would be a critical failure. And if you got a -1, you now need a 13, and a 3 is now a critical failure as well. So you added two numbers where the penalty mattered for your saving throw that
One of
you
the
had to
really
make.
cool tricks that I see a fair bit in second edition with regards to making the chance that that effect matters is reactions that you can trigger whenever something fails. So then
And that makes them even more
you're
powerful.
already guaranteed to be in the failing zone, and then you choose at that point that you want to
The
apply it.
amount more powerful that those are than the ones where you have to do it before
It's huge.
is enormous, and we can get into that later. Actually, right after I do this,
Yeah, sounds
which
good.
is finish describing whatever I was saying before you pointed that out, which is that bonuses and penalties are worth more because of the 4 degrees of success, but not as much as you think. People realize, wait a minute, they seem to be doing more than my gut says in Pathfinder 2, and then are like, wait, maybe that's because of the 4 degrees of success.
Mhm.
To an extent, yes. But really, part of the reason they do more than people think, especially that they're used to in other systems, is more attributable to the fact that it doesn't have a runaway out of control bonus economy where everything combines with everything and weird more
Hmm.
things are added to the game
So you're
than it
less
is to
likely
the
to
40
have you're
degrees
less
of
likely to have
success.
things where, for example, somebody who's great at something just auto succeeding it and then doesn't care. You're more likely to have cases where success or someone who's really not as good at something just doesn't even have a chance. You're more likely to have more cases where success or failure is a question,
Correct.
and so you see the effect.
Correct. And not only that, but just basically, our instincts, and by our, maybe not you, actually not me because I've trained myself into this after doing enough mathematical analysis, but as a whole of gamers, our instincts about what a +1 bonus
Hmm.
is just like, nah. Especially if I said it wasn't in PF2, where you've watched all the videos that say, well, there's 4 degrees of success. You'd be like, whatever, that's
Hmm.
useless. It's not going to do anything. It's a +1 bonus. But that's wrong. There are some situations in it where you've just kind of broken the math over your knee,
Hmm.
and it's just like, well, it doesn't help me
I
because
already had a +40 and
I
the
had a
DC was
plus
20.
98 and the DC was 5.
Yeah.
And then having a plus 99 doesn't matter because
Hmm.
the DC was 5.
Yeah.
Or even 40 or 50 or anything where I've already
Your oracle
succeeded.
says what?
The only thing that makes me fail is if the game has a mercy rule where a 1 fails.
Yeah.
So sure, then it doesn't matter. But if you're actually talking about something that is a remotely in question, like let's say it's a 50-50 chance,
Hmm.
a +1 bonus is contributing basically one more success on your 50-50 chance in a system without 4 degrees of success. That basically increases the odds that you succeeded by 10% from the starting amount. So like already when people think in their head, oh, it's 5%,
Hmm.
sure, but it's not at going from 100% to 105. It's going from
Yeah.
50 to 55. So it's actually that +1 is increasing your number of successes by basically 10% more than they were before. And so already that's actually pretty big.
And then you can think about like how does that apply if you then increase the bonus to +2 or
Yes.
+3 or +4.
And when you're going into 4 degrees of success,
Hmm.
sure, that's going to get even more ridiculous. I have been known to do this math on other design diaries. I'll do it again. You may have had me give you this question when you were watching one of our other shows, so you know the answer. But suppose you need a 10 on a d20 with your motives and penalties to hit the opponent's armor class. And then Linda said, see how it scales when it goes up. This actually scales very linearly, but we'll make it a +3 just for the heck of it.
Hmm.
And I decided to give you a +3 bonus on your check, and you're rolling an attack roll. So on a success, you hit on that 10, before the +3 bonus. On a 20, you do double damage, and you're expecting that you're expecting 20 damage. Like you do more than 20 on a hit, but you might miss because you need a 10. You're expecting 20 damage from your attack, and then I give you a +3. How much damage do you think you're expecting to deal on average with the +3 in Pathfinder Second Edition? If you were expecting 20 before you got the +3, I know +3 is more than +1.
Hmm.
It's +3.
Yeah.
Like how much more than 20? Anyone in chat can guess unless you literally have had me ask this exact question to you.
And and so you'll see also like that you're not going to often see bonuses to D20 rolls that are that big. And
Not in Pathfinder
and second
2.
in Pathfinder 2, like 4 is the absolute cap, and it's like, oh my gosh. And usually you're going to see ones.
Pathfinder 1, you would see it all the
Yeah,
time.
ones are most common, and then you'll see twos, and then like
In
there's a
5e,
really.
it's not that hard to get a d4 or a d6 added in certain
Mhm.
ways either. So,
But this is talking about this is talking about bonuses to D20 rolls. If you're
yes.
talking about like it's a
No,
lot.
I'm talking
Yeah.
about bonuses to d20 rolls. In
Yeah, yeah.
5e,
No, I
if
know
you
that,
find the
but
right thing, you can add a d4 or d6 to your d20 roll, the d6 could quickly become higher than +4.
yeah, but what I'm saying is that like it's a lot easier to find things that might be like a bonus to a damage roll because their impact is going to be a lot less, relatively speaking, than swaying the chance to hit or miss.
That's right. So, yeah, absolutely. And the question of if you're doing 20 damage expected, how much damage would you expect to have? How much damage would you expect to have total after you added a +3 when you needed a 10 to hit?
So it looks like we have a 9 as 9 additional as guest in chat. For a total of 29.
So a 9 additional for a total of 29. All right. So that answer is very, very accurate. It's basically you're expected to add 50% more.
Hmm.
And the reason why you're expected to add 50% more is because, which is huge. Like that plus three, and it scales. It's 1/6, then 1/3, then 50%. Each plus one adds 1/6 to your damage. That means that in a 6-player group, adding a plus one is like adding literally a seventh person.
Yes.
That little plus one, the one that everybody was, oh, that's not very useful. This is in Pathfinder 2. It is worth slightly less in other
Hmm.
groups than this. And the reason for that is
In
that,
praise of the bard.
yeah, absolutely, is that your 10 that you needed to hit means that you had an 11 in 20 chance of hitting, 1 in 20 of which is critting, so you had a 12 in 20 chance. Or, sorry, expected 12 in 20 of your damage roll. Now, when you added a plus 3, you added 3 hits and 3 crits, which is 6 in 20 of your damage roll. So you added 50% more. So whatever you had before, you just added 50% more. Now, the reason why Tela de Locadora got slightly the wrong number is that they probably misheard what I said to a different question, whereas your damage roll is 20, and what would happen if you added a plus 3, whereas I said your expected damage was 20. Your damage roll was actually a little bit above, was significantly above 20. And so your expected damage went from 20 to 30. So I think that they actually made two. They misheard me slightly, or I didn't explain it well enough, and they made a slight error that made them very, very close to the correct
But
answer.
it was a really
It was
close.
a
Yeah.
very good guess.
That's just about
Most
where it
people
led
get
to.
it wrong by a significant amount when they use their gut.
Yeah, and this is with a D20 roll based thing, and
With
D20 is
4
yeah,
degrees.
and D20s are very swingy
Yeah, absolutely.
compared to other things, and this is something we were talking about a little before, like the difference between saying I'm going to roll a D18 or I'm going to roll 3d6. It makes a huge difference in the distribution, and so like it makes a huge difference in the value of a bonus too.
That's right. And so basically, even in a system where you only have success or failure, a plus one when you needed a 50% when you had a 50% chance to hit and it was 20. Uh, sure, it doesn't add 1/6. It doesn't add 3.333333, but it does add or it does add 2 damage. So it
Mhm.
does add, like, people think that it makes it change by so much, but to have the degrees of success, it doubles or more the value of things, but it changes the difference in damage from 3.333 per plus one to 2 per plus one, which is,
Mhm.
it's less, but it's still a lot.
Yeah, Phil Littlecast talking about the dice multiples being more fun for damages for them than for chance rolls. Yeah, I can totally see that because chance rolls are going to have a lot more of a chance to do something that's really lucky or really unlucky and twist the story in an interesting way when you have just one die versus when you have a lot of them to smooth themselves out. You're gonna have a lot more of that sort of middle of the road result.
Yep, and Kshatriya points out that games sometimes have multiple dice. Each one is like a damage instance for lower damage that has some amount of absorption that is applied to it.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Depends on the game. In fact, those can be more fun because you will not skip your turn entirely if you have some degree of absorption and some degree of way around things. Absolutely. And yeah, so what I'm saying here is that if you are using bonuses and penalties in D20 tape system,
Hmm.
you probably are underestimating how valuable they are unless you are in that subset of hyper optimizers, which admittedly I have been in even before I was a game designer, who knows that you zone in on those plus ones, that they're actually valuable, and that you might complain about, oh, it's only a plus one, because some game systems, the game system itself doesn't realize how valuable it is willing to give you a plus four.
Well, if you are a
But
GM or if you have a GM who is in the habit of pointing out when something hit because of the bard's bonus, you'll notice how often you or the GM, if that's not you, is pointing that out too. And I think that's one way to help bring that to the forefront. It happens a lot.
the problem is, like, literally, okay, like, I know professional game designers and some of the best professional game designers who themselves like maybe did not as much understand the entire value of a plus one on a d20 in that sort of mathematical sense, as more went by the like, oh, it doesn't feel like it's that much.
Hmm.
And like in some cases though these are like I work together with a lot of different designers, authors, freelancers on projects, and they look at some of my analyses and math, and at the end are like, okay, I see that these are valuable, but you know what? They still don't feel good.
Yeah.
And they're right. They're right that they don't feel good. This is why bonuses and penalties are both super important and also very fraught. They're
Hmm.
usually, even though they're an easy reward to give, not a reward you should give. And that's why Pathfinder 2nd Edition moved away from giving lots and lots of bonuses and penalties and everything and having all these feats that are always some either conditional or highly usable bonus and
Hmm.
penalty, because they have huge impacts while feeling like they don't, so they don't feel as good to take.
So when you do have those kinds of things that give bonuses and penalties, they're going to be generally a lot more situational. So it's like, this is the thing I pull out for this thing that I'm good at in the story, and it's not the thing that I'm always going back to.
Because the problem is, for optimization, they crowd everything else out because they're so
Hmm.
strong. But since they feel bad, they also heavily widen the achievement gap between people who are optimizing and people who are doing what feels good.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in the context of like teamwork feats in Pathfinder First Edition as an example of
They're
something
the
that
the anti sweet spot of the worst
is
possible
very
situation.
powerful, but people think isn't very powerful. So then, for the people who do, a lot of people wouldn't take it because they don't like it. But then, for the people who do take it, it's like really powerful. Whereas having something that like feels really fun to take but doesn't
But it's
upset the
actually
system
balanced is the
is
I
the
call
optimal.
it the
Yeah.
holy grail of game design. Is it makes you feel like so good. You feel on cloud nine,
Hmm.
but it's actually completely balanced and expected by the game system and works great with everybody else. That's the holy grail. And the anti-holy grail, like the evil tainted grail of
Hmm.
game design, is teamwork feats, where it's actually super ridiculously powerful and everyone thinks it was the worst.
Yeah. So like our home
Like,
group
we
used them
literally, there
constantly.
were literally situations that I saw, like, when previewing, like, the Hunter class for the Advanced Class Guide in Pathfinder 1. I was on the design
Hmm.
team. I didn't work on the Advanced Class Guide, but I joined and helped preview the Hunter class, because the person who did work on that was not at Paizo, and so I previewed those classes.
Hmm.
Where, like, the entire Paizo forum, except one dude who, like, I know their screen name but don't really know them in person, and then like
Hmm.
Michael Sayer, who's not a designer at Paizo at the time, but is just like
Yeah.
a guy on the Paizo forum, are both like, no, listen, everybody, these teamwork feats are very strong.
Yeah.
And those two, Mike Sayer and this one other guy on Paizo.com, with long analyses going against like 70 people who are all like, they're
Hmm.
useless.
Yeah, considering we're always talking about when you hit with an attack AOO, whenever you AOO, everyone around you AOOs, which lets you AOO. That's one of the chains our group constantly did. Yes, butterfly sting.
Yes.
Then we also had the and everybody has lookout.
Yes. That was, when did we not have that? I was usually the only person who didn't have lookout.
Yeah,
But absolutely.
it was pretty much constant in our campaigns.
So
that it's like
the
you know
problem is that
the question was, did you take lookout or did you at level 7 or did you wait to take leadership?
That's
first?
correct. So, like, the thing about teamwork feats in Pathfinder 1 is partially is the bonuses were what they gave, and people underestimated them. But sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes
Mhm.
it was different. Be very careful about bonuses and your instincts with bonuses, because people are not going to realize how strong they are. And they're among the strongest things that you can give. And they get even stronger, as we just showed, in Pathfinder 2e than they've ever been. However, the advantage Pathfinder 2e has is that I guess they reached the first time that a fan base reached critical mass and realizing that a +1 was very powerful,
Yeah.
because they became ever so slightly more powerful, such that there is a meta of Pathfinder 2 players who grill themselves. No, listen, I know my brain is always going to say that it's weak, but I know it's strong. And so that has had a very good positive effect.
And another thing
for
that's
Pathfinder
important to
2.
keep in mind with those like situational bonuses, I just thought of this is like that the player is choosing, hey, this is a thing that I want to, this is a thing that I want to be good at, and so I'm going to take this. Otherwise, you run into the situation where you just have a lot of bonuses that you're never going to use. So to give an example from PFS, there was sort of the stereotypical one of like, this gives you a +1 bonus on diplomacy checks against Knowles from Catapest.
Western Catapest.
Western Catapest.
And then the only adventure with Knowles are an Eastern Catapest.
So
you're
was,
like, no!
You could never use it. But like, even if you had been able to use that like once, having a lot of situational bonuses that you just have to keep track of, it's a lot of mental load. You don't want to have like
it
a
just
folder
makes
of
it
all that
very
stuff.
unapproachable.
And that's also like part of the reason why in Society we went to the achievement points model, where it's more like pick the boons that you want and select what you're opting into, rather than here's your giant folder.
You only increase complexity by the amount of something you know you were going to use.
Yeah, exactly.
It's huge. Because giving you this massive list of things just raises the gap between the people who have enough time to memorize all of them and pull out just the right one, and the people who are just trying to play. It's part of a similar thing to Ivory Tower game design, where you create so many abilities, some of which are intentionally bad, which is very bad idea overall, I think. But so that people can feel good about finding the ones that are the best ones. You don't want to have a game system that is actively trying to trick people into picking bad options. You just want to have a game system that's lots of cool options, so that players who like making combos can find really cool combos and do push them up, but not because you're trying to make hidden in there ones that you intentionally made better and ones that you intentionally made worse.
And Kitsune's talking about some examples of bonus implementations that pause the game, like Anstone and Starfinder, that gives you a +1 when you miss by exactly one, so you have to ask the GM every time you fail a check.
Absolutely. That reminds me of a certain type of game design, which actually bonuses and penalties rarely do, but Kitsune Warlock, you managed to come up with a bonus that does this. Something that's even worse than the holy anti-grail of game design, where it feels weak but is actually super powerful, is something that literally just makes the game miserable. And my favorite example is one from multiple editions ago D&D book that made the game miserable even by its mere existence.
Yes.
Miserable and unplayable. But the moment you used it and could no longer use it again, the game was fine and fun again until you got your uses back, and then it was miserable and unplayable for the rest of the game until you used it. And that was a necklace that allowed you to rewind time by exactly one round to like whatever was the previous round before that. Everybody got their stuff undone.
And now, because we're not a video game that can just go back and have that all remembered, you would then have to be constantly keeping a good enough record.
Yes, you needed an accountant that was following your game, was a stenographer that would be able to, at every point in time, know what would happen if time got rewound by an entire round, so that you could do it. And once it was used, since it was once per day, now your game's fine. You don't have to do that anymore. But even if the person who wore it just never used it, it was just like, I'm only saving it for an emergency if somebody dies, it still made the game a nightmare of horror for everyone.
Incidentally, be very careful when designing things with time magic, because time magic has an unfortunate tendency to, even if it's not quite as that's why time bacon is bad. Even if it's not like that egregious, things that are going to let you undo things, anything that could be undone then needs to be memorized.
All is as it was. So yeah, absolutely. So you need
what was the spell was actually called Time Beacon, I think.
I think it was because even though like a bunch of us got together and tried to workshop all the ways that we were like, this is going to be highly abusable. Let's try to close the loopholes. There were still like 4 loopholes that we didn't see.
And then this was one of the ones where we sometimes run into when looking at organized play sanctioning, where it's like, if you have a consistent home group, you can easily work out a way to make this work great for you. But if you're a player who's taking this to different tables and every GM has a different interpretation of how this works, this is going to be kind of a pain.
Yes.
And we cannot, and just like design couldn't possibly close every loophole, we can't possibly close every loophole. So that's one of the reasons why sometimes we don't include stuff in organized play, if we're just like, yeah, this is something we can see being ruled in several different legitimate ways.
Absolutely. And Kitsune Warlock points out Dark Archive had cool time effects. So did Secrets of Magic.
Yeah.
We had cool time effects from Jessica Catalan in Secrets of Magic and Michael Raccoon in Dark Archive.
Yeah.
And both of those are great examples. In fact, I often use Cast into Time, um, that Jessica wrote, as an example of an incredible time effect, because even if you are like accelerating time to like not go back in time and force people to redo things and just messing around with actions,
Hmm.
you either wind up getting a little repetitive sometimes, or like really really messing up the game. But Cast Into Time gave that feeling of, I've thrown you through time. You like did a whole, you went back and forth through the time for a long period of time. But and it had the flavor of that, and they disappear and reappear. But the general effect of it is mostly just damage and sickened. So it's very easy for a GM to adjudicate.
Yeah.
But it totally does feel like that's happened, and they even do disappear, which actually has some weird side effects where you can get them off the map until the end of your turn,
Hmm.
possibly causing like you to be able to like move through the area where they were.
But yeah, one of the main points is that like you are in a situation where no one needs to pay attention to what happened until you declare I'm using this ability, and then people pay attention. There's not
And
going to be like
it
a
didn't do
retroactive.
any weird thing that messed with the action economy, the
Yeah.
order of initiative, gave extra actions, took away actions, anything like that. It did
Hmm.
something that everyone knows how to apply. We all felt like it was time-ish, and maybe someone would say it didn't feel as time-ish as things
Hmm.
that messed with all those other things, but it felt like some degree, 80% as
Yeah.
time-ish as those
And you
things.
can have things that mess with things in other systems, like in World of Darkness, the game we're playing. We have like mages and changes and things like that, and it's like, oh yeah, they have magic that's going to drastically accelerate and give you a bajillion extra turns, but so do the enemies, and some of the enemies are just like werewolves or vampires who have a bajillion extra turns anyway. So it's like, okay, this is part of the meta that you have this.
That's right. So if you can take the time effect into the meta, then
Hmm.
that is one way that time can create bonuses and penalties as well. Uh, Moving back on to what we were previously saying, though, is that bonuses and penalties exist in D20 systems. They're more important than you think they are, unless you have watched all of these videos about the importance of bonuses and penalties, and now at this point have been scared into thinking they're even more important than they are, in which case you're like that one
And
person.
one person,
You
yeah.
can leave us a comment on wherever, if this eventually goes somewhere with comments on it. Be like, I'm that person. I've been scared into thinking they're always more
Oh
important
yeah,
than
did
they
you have
are.
something else you wanted to say about the like reaction retroactive bonuses?
Oh, right. I was going to say that you can actually calculate how much more powerful the reaction retroactive bonuses are to the reaction proactive bonuses. So, here's how. First of all, the reaction proactive bonuses are about as valuable as we were saying before
Hmm.
in Pathfinder Second Edition. So, like for instance, a +3 on a saving throw.
When you know you have to roll a saving throw.
Yes. A +3 on a saving throw. Let's say, like, if we get it as close as possible to the other situations, like you have evasion
Yeah.
and but it was very hard anyway, and you needed a 10, and oh wait, no, it would be the opposite, wouldn't it? You're Oh no, yeah, it was you had evasion and it was very difficult, and you needed a 12, and then you're like getting a +2, so you're
Hmm.
removing some of these effects. So that can actually, the difference between, or you need a 10 and you took a -2 penalty.
Hmm.
The -2 penalty that you took on your saving throw at that point in time is going to make you take a third more damage. The same thing as with the attack roll. It would have actually been different if you didn't have evasion, because you
Hmm.
wouldn't take 0 on a
Yeah, but
success.
evasion makes it easier to.
So, and we were talking about, so when you have this, you're getting like that +2, like that nimble dodge or whatever, right? It could be subtracting like a quarter of their damage.
Yeah.
Maybe less, maybe more, depends on how strong they are. If they're like a big boss, it could be less of a important. If they're very weak, it actually is more likely to subtract a higher percentage, but their damage isn't as high. If you actually only use it when it matters, then it depending on what you're fighting, for many encounters, it asymptotically approaches just having the +2 period.
Yeah.
which is worth a lot more than just that particular roll reducing your
There's
damage.
another benefit to that too, from the perspective of the play experience too. When you have something that's like must be applied, you know, after rolling but before learning the results of the roll, then you have to be like, wait, don't tell me whether I succeeded. Oh no, wait, somebody saw my number and said something. Now I can't use it. Whereas if it's always like after the result, you never have to worry about the order of operations. It's much easier also for things like say you're playing on a virtual tabletop, but when you roll, it always tells you what the bonus is.
Yes. Whereas Pathfinder 1 and 3.5 and 3.0 had a lot of things that were like, you roll and see your number on the d20, but you can't know the result yet. And it's like, well, this
This
is
highly advantages people who know the game
this is
well.
also
And they can
fatally
guess.
flawed because there's many times that everyone knows that your 20 succeeded.
Yes.
So what do? You knew the result. There was no time before you knew the result.
Mhm.
So PF2 and indeed many other systems don't do effects where it's between rolling and learning the result because that's a step that doesn't work. Math guy Dave points out a very good point, which is that 1D&D, aka the 2024 revision of 5e, aka 5th edition, whatever
What's the current
thing they're calling it, the 5th edition core rulebooks.
Okay.
Or something like that. 2044 5th edition core rulebooks, something similar. Has changed heroic advantage to be inspiration after the roll, which is a big boost because once you've seen what the first roll is, it's much better than doing it beforehand. Absolutely.
And then, especially if it's a limited resource, you can feel like you're allocating it well. Because it can also be frustrating to say, "Oh, you know, I'm going to apply this bonus before the roll," and then you still fail, or you're like, "Oh, I rolled high, I didn't need that anyway." It feels like you have a lot more. Well, it feels for a very good reason, like you have a lot more control over the narrative. Like you're not wasting your resources, and you're really going to spend them when they count.
Yes, but yeah, basically the
Oh yeah, D5D with a fancy sort of ampersand 5. That's legit.
Yeah. So, like, to do a little bit of calculations to show what I mean by the asymptotic approaching of the value towards just always having it, is let's say you're in a situation where you get attacked 4 times for some reason at the same accuracy as each other, and then nobody makes their second attack on you. 4 creatures all make their first attack on you. Now, realistically, maybe one creature would attack you, 2 creatures attack you twice is more likely than
But this is easier to do the math.
This is way easier to do the math on, right? And so if you're adding a +2 bonus to your AC against one of those 4 attacks, then you're basically taking the full damage from 3 of them. And we said the situation was that we decided that you reduced their damage by a quarter because they needed an 8 to hit you, and you put it down to a 10, right? So
and then you have one of them that you're
so you're now taking 3 3/4 of a creature's damage. But if you are able to do the +2 afterwards, then you get the more as long as you don't have a lot of attacks on you, it gets closer and closer to just be taking 3.
Yeah, because you're probably only going to have one that fell in that range, and then when it mattered, you stick the bonus.
Exactly. The number of times that you had multiple that were in the +2 range is relatively small compared to the times that you had nothing that was in the +2 range. As long as you're not being like completely swarmed. Or the time that you had exactly one, when you're technically 4 times in any case. Yeah. That it would matter. So, like, in this particular example, the chance that it would matter is literally 1 in 5. So the chance that it never mattered in the 4 attacks is 41%, right? And the chance that it mattered once in the attacks is in the 4 attacks is 40%. So together, there's less than a 20% chance that you actually couldn't block all the times when it would matter. Yeah, that's what I mean about it being pretty close. It starts approaching, and the fewer attacks you have against you, the better. Just having the bonus all the time. And so, when compared to having it once and you have to use it ahead of time, where it only reduced your damage by 1/4 out of 4, and aka 1/16.
That also increases the mental burden on the player too, because then they have to sit there and be like, "Who do I think has the highest attack bonus?" or like or who do I think will do the most damage, as opposed to just being like, okay, yeah, that person's gonna hit me. They look pretty dangerous. I think I'm gonna use it now.
That's right.
You don't have to like wait and try to guess. Oh, is this gonna be the best time? Or maybe if I spend it now, then I'll need it. Well, I mean, there's still some aspect of like maybe I don't want to bother on the minion or whatever. But like,
Right. And so, like, it's actually over triple as
mhm.
powerful against 4 attacks as it was to do it before the roll. So it's much much more powerful. So it's all very interesting about even the timing. Some people underestimate whether the timing of the bonus and penalty is going to make that much of a difference to it. It totally does.
Mhm. As of course does the action economy of applying it. One of the things that I also see with bonuses and penalties, and this is another thing that I find myself changing in adventures, is is folks saying, hey, one person can roll, but like, any number of, but like, other, and or like when you're trying to gather successes, and it's like you can either roll or you can aid someone else, but like then you're like trying to maybe give someone a +1 versus giving yourself a whole entire roll, and that's really really unlikely to be worth it.
So let's split that apart. Linda is already making an assumption that not everyone would make, that someone was using excellent game design and realized that when you have a lot of people who need to roll, you need to use some kind of time pressure or limit to the number of checks everyone is allowed to make.
Yes, go ahead.
And so therefore, this person who decided to use their time limited checks to just give you a +1 bonus
Mm-hmm.
is that they have lost the opportunity to make their own check. That's not always true. Fourth edition
Mm-hmm.
D&D skill challenges did not have that rule, and therefore it was always the most optimal possible solution for literally everyone to, except the best person, to roll to assist, because there was no time limit to them. You just needed to not fail a certain number
I'm
of
talking
times.
about some of the like standard simple victory point based challenges,
Exactly.
things like that, where it's like, okay, everybody gets a chance to roll, and instead of rolling, you can choose to aid.
Yes.
I find
And
myself
you've lost
striking
your
that. I
chance.
find myself striking that line because it's a
Absolutely.
trap.
Absolutely. Now, if you're playing where it's just like keep rolling until you succeed and don't get this many failures,
Mm-hmm.
then aiding is not a trap, but also it was bad game design probably to do the challenge in the first place for the same reason that aiding is not a trap, which is that attempting is a trap unless you are.
Unless you're the one who has the highest bonus. Yeah.
Yes. It
So it
is
discourages
it
participation.
is generally true that unless you have a weird aid based build that like get, or you're
Mhm.
very high level and the ADC is very easy and you can critically succeed and give a very large bonus, in most cases, either aiding is a trap or attempting is a trap for anyone except for one person. And there's very few situations
Mm-hmm.
where
Or both of
it's
them
like,
are
oh, both
legit.
of them are equally valid.
Yeah.
Um,
So you might see something where it's like, okay, yeah, only one person can attempt, and so like multiple people can attempt to aid them or see it, and then if somebody gets it, then they have the bonus.
yes. And Kitsune Warlock talks about the even more powerful than the thing we already talked about being redonkulously
Mm-hmm.
powerful, where everybody rolls and you use the highest roll, which is everybody rolls. The highest is the primary roll, and everyone else has retroactively aided
Aided
to
them,
give them
yes.
bonuses, which is just like astronomically ridiculously powerful. As we showed earlier in the episode,
Mm-hmm.
so scroll back to that point in the episode of the fact that just having everybody roll like dramatically makes it so that you have to make the difficulty ridiculously high if you want there to be a decent chance of
Mm-hmm.
failure. Unless your goal is to have nobody fail, in which case maybe don't make it a check at all. Maybe just let people get through.
Yeah.
That's another important factor for bonuses and penalties, which is if it's something you don't want to fail, just don't throw a check.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to throw a check with bonuses and penalties on it, there should be an interesting result to the failure and the success. Which shouldn't just be that you lose, it should fail forward. It'd be, oh, I failed, but that means the plot continues, but at this disadvantage.
Yeah. And but the converse isn't necessarily true. There can still be value to stating DCs that under normal circumstances would be impossibly hard to bypass or extremely hard to bypass, as a way to say this thing is supposed to be really hard,
Yes.
but you're not saying this is impossible. So then that way, like, a GM has a sense of how difficult it is. The players can try against it. They can really get a sense of how far they are from succeeding, And if you're doing an adventure that's taking place over many levels, like, and they decide to come back at that point, then they can get it.
That's right.
It feels less like you're, like they opened a door and they found a white wall behind it.
Yep, absolutely. So I would say, if you're in the chat and you've got questions about bonuses or penalties, send them our way because I think that we've made a lot of our cases for the mathematical, philosophical, and game design underpinnings of bonuses and penalties, including the hidden ones that are sort of letting multiple people roll, fortune and
Rerolls,
misfortune
yeah.
chance effect, rerolls, rolling multiple times,
Adding
other
a die.
yeah, adding a die, anything that's going to manipulate your chances is essentially in the realm of things that we would consider bonuses and penalties. And so take that into account. Take into account like our inherent weakness at having intuition about them,
Hmm.
and you can use that to become an even better game designer and an even better game master and even better player or even more optimal player, I guess, if you're like, ah, ha ha ha, now I know I should take those plus ones because they're always good. Never ever leave a plus one behind unless you use that to get plus ones in other things.
Yeah, definitely. I find myself like when I'm thinking about how good something is, might be doing a quick calculation or pulling up a spreadsheet to model something out, because doing the math can really help with getting a sense of exactly how powerful something is.
That's right. Absolutely. And I mean, you can leave a plus one on your chances behind if you get a much better effect without the plus one, for example.
Thoughts on bonuses that are themselves dice based. So
Ah,
like a
well,
plus,
yeah, we
yeah,
talked about that
a little bit, but
a little bit. The 5e had like d4s and
mhm,
d6s and other things
they're
like that.
really swingy. So if you have something like that, you need to be ready for it to give the highest benefit.
That's right.
If it's like a benefit on, I'm talking about like a benefit on, like a benefit on D20 rolls, for example.
Where you
And,
take the
inspiration
d20
die,
and
yeah.
then add another die to the d20 and you just add them all together.
Hmm.
They're incredibly swingy. You'll have heard about the fact that adding a bunch of dice together is overall much more tending towards the mean and is
Hmm.
less swingy than a d20 is, which is true.
But if you're, yeah,
It is true, but it hides some very important factors, which is
especially because oftentimes when you see this, you're gonna have the big D20, and then you're gonna have like the smaller bonus.
sure. And let's say it was even a d20 plus a d10, like one of the
Yeah, yeah.
biggest things someone might give you. So you'd be like, okay, when people tell you that adding lots of dice together, like 3d6, absolutely tends toward the mean way more
Hmm.
than a d20. It's going to be a bell curve, you're much less likely to get an extreme value. But, while a d20 plus a d10 totally is less extreme than a d30,
Hmm.
it just is. A d20 plus a d10 is very swingy. It's just that nobody was considering a D30 before this point in time,
Yeah.
so
Whereas
therefore,
the D30 is really the
like,
comparator
so
when you
if
talk about being less
a
swingy.
lot of people who learn totally correctly that 3d6 are way less swingy than a d20 think, oh, when I add these other dice, it'll make it tend towards the mean, it'll create a
Hmm.
bell curve distribution, and it's going to be better. But if you've ever played, for example, the Pathfinder Adventure card game, where you wind up adding more of whatever your die is when you like cast spells or use other effects, it's like, oh, well, add another die to this. What you'll quickly learn is the same thing that is the same insight that one of our viewers said earlier in the episode of like nobody makes a string of 20 numbers and puts a lot of heads and tails together, which
Hmm.
is yes, it's less like in your Pathfinder Adventure card game. If you have your D12 and you rolling 4D12, that's less swingy than a D50, but it's a
Hmm.
really really swingy. And so even though it will tend way more towards 26, that a D50 is not going to be nearly as likely to get a 40, like a 49. Actually, it can't.
Yeah.
But 48, 47. Um, it still actually has a pretty good chance to be pretty far away from a 26. It's just that where it is on
Hmm.
that falls in a bell distribution, and 26 does happen to be the most likely result.
Yeah, so the game has to be ready for the highest value and the lowest value on whatever the extra dice are.
Yes, and if you're playing Pathfinder Second Edition with the 4 degrees of success, like get ready for a very wackily ridiculous situation.
Yeah, well, like we were saying before, that 4 is the highest that you would ever have. So you go between like this absolutely extreme, like situational high level benefit.
And you've got this like
Yeah.
basic bardic ability in 5e that you decided to port to say PF2 and be like,
Hmm.
yeah, we'll just add a D6 to things. And it's like that is a lot.
Hmm.
That's really game changing because sure, there are going to be some times when it's a one, and you're like, oh well, in PF2 I could have given one to the entire party all the time, and here I used a limited resource that I gave one. The thing is that when you roll the six, it's going to change the entire fight potentially
Yeah.
because that crit is going to make a massive effect, and you have a very high chance that you just turn something into a crit.
Yeah, adding a whole d6, or like I was saying before, like the if you're adding it to something like damage, then it's going to be less.
Right. The weird thing is, well, failed cat, low cat god said add a whole d6 with in 5e with a bard. The weird thing is that bardic inspire courage for PF2 is generally, other than that you can swing high, it's generally way more powerful in PF2 because you are adding to everybody the bonus
Hmm.
at all the time. And in 5e, you have a pretty limited number of them that you can use, and it's only adding to that one for the one person, even if they have lots of different attacks.
So then, in the same way that when when
And you don't have the ability to make it into a crit, so
yeah,
it's less valuable from that
in the same way
perspective.
that like when a lot of people are rolling, someone's probably going to roll well. You know, and when a lot of people are rolling, someone's probably going to get a roll where you're a +1 battered.
Yes, exactly. So it's weirdly the case that if you were able to port the PF2 Inspire Courage directly into 5e, it would, I think, usually be better than Inspiration is. But there are situational situations where Inspiration is better because you can just pick somebody who's making a roll that's much more consequential than everybody
Yes.
else's roll and add that d6 to it. So yeah, absolutely. That's a good point and a good question about the die based ones. So I would generally recommend that if you're playing a normal d20 type thing, and I say normal only because that's just what a lot of the most popular ones are. All any die system,
Hmm.
any tabletop RPG can be normal, and ones like that work like the Pathfinder Adventure card game where you
Yeah.
just add more of the same die size, that totally works for that system, but
Hmm.
it's very swingy, and you may not want to introduce that swing to your D20 game unless that's what you're hoping for. Whereas another fun thing to do is where you add more of the same type of die, but then you're only taking some number of them, where you make it really easy to add a bunch of them. And like, let's say you're like, okay, so my damage roll is gonna roll this handful of D12s, and I'm only gonna take the best three.
Yeah.
So rather than or for the attack roll, you add it's a d20 and all of these different advantages that I have.
Hmm.
Let's say let's say you wanted to make an alternate for 5e advantage. And instead of so we know 5e advantage gives a round of 4 to a 5, right, for rolling twice. But let's say you wanted to make an alternate to that would let people have multiple advantages and multiple disadvantages
Hmm.
in a way that didn't just say, oh, well, once I have one advantage and one disadvantage, they cancel and then nothing else matters. But you also didn't want to be like, let's add them all up and like subtract them from each other. So
Hmm.
what you could do is you could say, okay, we're doing new 5e advantage. Every advantage is a d8, and every disadvantage is potentially. We can worry about that later if we
Hmm.
want to do this the same way, but we can say every advantage is a d8. We'll roll them all. Take the highest one and apply that. So it becomes more and more likely that you got an 8, but on
Yeah.
average it gives 4.5. And you could say every disadvantage is a d8, take the lowest one, subtract that. And so if you could do that, and that will make it so that like you don't run into the situation like in 5e that you could be where it's like, well, my elf has advantage in forests to
Hmm.
this, so therefore when I'm in a forest I will just never. It's like, well, are you going to do an ambush where you
There's
like
no
come
point.
from the
Yeah.
trees? Well, there's no point. I already have advantage in forest all the time, so my elf will just stand there in the open and be like, but don't elves usually like do interesting guerrilla tactics in the trees? Yeah, well, I don't have to because I already have advantage always. So That
Or
would
if you're
give you a
talking in
reason
some
to
other
get
games,
advantage
there's
more
Shadow of the
times.
Demon Lords, Banes and Boons, and Lancer's Advantage.
Failed Little Cat God says that is how
Yeah.
Lancer does it for advantage. There's a lot of indie systems that work like that.
Mhm.
Just so you know, it's not just Lancer. You can get that kind of situation with Blades in the Dark, where
Mhm.
you're rolling more dice and you're trying to get the one die that rolls high
You
enough.
can also have
That's how
ones
your
that
stats even work in there.
you can also have cases where dice may be bonuses or penalties.
Yep. For example, in the Cortex system, all of the dice you roll, you take the highest of all of them. But if even one of them rolls a one, something that bad happens. So because of the fact that because of this particular fact, and because of the number of dice you usually have
Mhm.
floating around, and they can be of many different sizes from like D4 up to D10, adding a D4 to your roll is generally considered to be a negative thing to do in the Cortex system
Mhm.
because
The chance of
the
a
chance
one
that the
versus.
D4 was
Mhm.
actually your highest number
Mhm.
out of all the dice you were rolling is very low, but the chance that it gave you a 1 is relatively high. Whereas adding a D6, well, it did have a chance to be the only die that rolled a 1, but it also has an okay chance of being the highest one that makes you succeed at the check. And so therefore the way they deal with complications is in Cortex, and let's say you're doing, I don't know, leverage, is that it's like, well, Nate's an alcoholic, and so
Mhm.
therefore his alcoholism came into effect, so roll a d4. But I guess, like, if you roll a 4 and that was what you needed to succeed,
RPG Gamer says that's not a negative thing to do in Cortex. That gives you the sweet plot points.
well, you do get a plot point because the bad thing happened, but it is considered to be negative that the bad thing happened. So you roll, but if you roll a 4 because your complication came up, it's like, well, apparently his alcoholism, like, he got drunk, stumbled away somewhere, and actually ran into someone who was really useful to solve this
Mhm.
problem by mistake. And
Yeah.
it actually turned into a positive by good luck. But normally, it's not going to help you unless, as RPG Gamer says, you want the extra point that you get, the mercy point you get for the bad thing happening, which you do always get a mercy point in exchange for the bad thing happening in
Mhm.
Cortex.
I was also thinking about it from the perspective of like things that may have a chance to go really well or really poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Like you might have like sort of the wild magic style things where like this might benefit you or might harm you, and for that thing
Yeah,
you could have something where it you could be like a bonus or a penalty,
absolutely.
or like with fudge dice where you have some or other dice where you have like maybe some positive numbers and some negative numbers on them.
Mm-hmm.
Like we did a little game once where like your ability and skills was represented by like the numbers that were on the die you rolled, and we made like virtual dice to make this easier, and it would be like, okay, yeah, well, you know, as you get better at this skill, one of the minus ones on this die turns into a 0, or the zeros turns into a +1, or what have you.
And Mizor points out the opposite effect in Savage Worlds is that D4s don't give you a high number, but they have the best chance to get an ace for you because that you actually want to do that for the exact opposite reason. RB Gamers points out that in Cortex you can often refuse the complication and not get the point. I feel like that though. I read a much earlier. Like I read one that was not the most up to date one as the most
Hmm.
recent one I read, but I feel like you had to also like actually pay in to refuse it. So it was kind of like it wasn't that you could just keep shutting down all complications by not taking plot points because it
Hmm.
was essentially a swing of -1 to not take the complication or +1 to take it. So it was worth 2, and you would
Yeah.
eventually have to take a complication. I think I may also be misremembering. It's been a little while since I read my Cortex, but I thought that the idea was that eventually a complication would happen if you kept rolling ones over and over again and being like, no, I do not like the spirit of like the game being a give and take, and I want never to have never to have a complication come up that it would run out. Maybe not. But it's one of the Cortex Plus games may have played that way, but not the current iteration. Yeah, that's possible. The one I read is pretty early, and I think was before the even all of Cortex Plus was mapped out. It may have been an early leverage one, for example.
So whatever the case may be,
Yes,
yeah. But
it's
also
still.
like yeah.
I believe that it's still an interesting point that at least the one I read specifically said that that complication or the D4 was meant to be something the GM was throwing in to
Hmm.
mess you up at that point in time. And Tele de Logador reworked the +3 question. and determined that that it is a range of around 50% increase of a damage bonus if you originally had a 50% chance for a normal hit and a 5% chance to crit. Now, yep, that's what I said.
Hmm.
It goes up from a total of basically 60% of your base damage to 90% of your base damage. Absolutely. 100%. And going up to from 60 to 90% of your base damage is just like ridiculous.
Yeah.
That would mean if your base damage was 30, it would go up from 18 to 27 as your expected damage. Back to our early question that I asked about what +3 gives you with degrees of success.
We have gone full circle.
We have. So, I think we got to everybody's questions about bonuses and penalties. We've talked more about bonuses and penalties than we usually do about anything.
Hmm.
So, if that's the case, let's say goodbye to YouTube, and then I will tell Twitch a little bit more stuff. Bye, YouTube. See you next time.
Bye.